What is your most terrifying animal encounter? I'm from Florida, and I was volunteering at a local nature conservancy. One of our tasks was to remove fallen logs that were blocking up a creek after a big storm. The creek was about chest deep, 15 feet wide, and opaque brown. Many Florida freshwater ways a brown sea of tannins leached into the river from trees. As I'm moving logs, I notice a 12-foot alligator on the embankment I hadn't noticed before. It then slid into the creek I was in. I was with a land manager who was moving logs with me, and a herpetologist who was in the canoe. I asked them what to do and they responded, well, those logs aren't gonna move themselves, and that gator's probably just trying to get away from us. Still, spending 30 minutes in a creek you can't see anything, knowing there's an alligator lurking near your feet, moving logs which looked like free king alligators was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. Edit. Definitely didn't expect this to blow up. I've told this story a million times and it usually gets a "huh, that's wild" reaction. But most of my coworkers and many of my friends are natural resource workers, so they are used to this stuff. I've been woken up by a bear sniffing my head once. Was cowboy camping, no tent, in Leal Canyon in Yosemite once, when I hear something sniff right next to my head. My sleep-addled brain thinks it's a ranger on a horse telling me to move my camp. Had hiked about 20 miles that day. You have to be at least 4 miles into the canyon to camp, and I wasn't 100% sure I'd made it far enough, since it was dark, when I set up camp. Anyways, I say just 1 second, sit up, grope for my flashlight and turn it on to see a black bear a couple feet away. I holler, he tears off. I get out and empty my bladder and try to fall back asleep until I hear him coming around again. I make a bunch more noise, decide I'm not getting any more sleep, break camp and slowly night hike until the sun rises. At the time I was working until 1 AM, so I wouldn't get home until 2 or so. I opened the door to the house and felt what I thought was a breeze come by my leg. I don't really pay attention, walk over to my desk, put my keys down, and turn the light on. Right when I do so, there are 2 possums in the act of mating in the middle of my kitchen. They screamed, I screamed, and we began the 3-hour dance of getting them out of my house. I ended up trapping them in a dog cage and dumping them out in the middle of my backyard. I almost petted one on accident. Stepped out onto the back porch one night to get some air. Lights were out, but I saw the distinctive white blob of fur that I assumed was my cat, Frank. I went down to pet him, and he looked up at me, at which point I noticed that his face got a lot longer and his eyes a lot beadier. Well, it wasn't Frank. I locked eyes with this possum, my hand about 3 inches away from its face. We both froze. Then it took off running into the yard and crashed into the back fence. I was so sure I was about to lose a finger or 2. Went to war with a huntsman spider and a mucade centipede simultaneously in my shower in Japan. Yes, I was naked. Yes, I won. I was stationed in Japan for 3 out of the 6 years I was in the Navy. During that time I leased a Japanese house, and the shower was its own room, full walk-in with a tub, bench, etc. Amazing. So as the post says, I stumble into the shower one morning still half asleep, and out of my peripherals I see a black flash from behind me, and hear a thud. Look into the tub and there is a huntsman spider the size of my hand staring back at me. Holy shit. My best guess is it was on the wall behind me, and got scared when I walked in. So I go into attack mode immediately, grab the shower head which was on a hose, take aim looking to drown this thing in the tub drain, and as soon as I turned the water on it jumped out of the tub onto the wall, and ran into the windowsill. Tactic then became opening the window fast, and pinching to death in the sill. As soon as I touched the glass it jumped out onto the wall again, and ran out the shower door. Now I'm cornered in the shower peering out into the powder room, to see the huntsman on the cabinet door waiting for me. Sneak to the front door of the house and grab a flip-flop. Come back to the powder room and wing the flip-flop at the spider. Hit it, wound several of the legs, but do not kill it. It runs out of the bathroom and underneath the stairs, much slower than it was moving prior. Feeling confident that spider is cornered under the stairs, I grab a can of bug spray and move in to finish it. Looking closely under the stairs, it was a hollow staircase where you could see through the gaps between steps. I see a black tail curled over the back lip of one of the stairs, and assume it's the spider hiding on the back of the step. Hit it with the spray. Enter fucking mucade centipede. It dropped off the back of the stair and started charging at me. I immediately peed a little. Front half of its body was up off the floor and its mouth was visibly biting. It backed me up all the way to the front door as I emptied the entire can of bug spray on it. By the time we got to the door, it was obviously overcome by the chemicals and just writhing around, so I grabbed the other flip-flop and smashed it. Didn't work. Hit it a few times, and it would not die, so I turned the flip-flop on its edge and used it like a saw to cut the thing in half. Then remembered the spider. It was still under the stairs, so I blew under there, and it ran out wounded, and I smashed it with the flip-flop saw. Then I screamed at the top of my lungs for 30 seconds. The whole battle took probably 3 minutes, but it felt like a freaking lifetime. I think being naked caused an adrenaline rush 1,000 times greater than if I were fully clothed. When I got to work I was frazzled enough for my co-workers to notice. Can't tell if it was the worst morning of my life or my biggest triumph, but man won that day. When I was young, I went fishing with my dad and my best friend. We waded out through some deeper water to reach the shallow sandbar, where we fished for quite a while. The tide came in, and the water, that had been just above my ankles, was now above my waist. Suddenly a large shark, about 7 to 8 feet, crashed through a school of mullet only a few feet away from me. Dad saw it, my best friend saw it, and for a second we all three just kind of froze with our mouths hanging open. Quietly, calmly, Dad told us to walk back to shore, splashing as little as possible. We did, but the tide had come in, and I wasn't as tall as the other two guys. The deeper water between the sandbar and shore reached their chests, but I could hardly keep my head above water, while my feet barely bounced along the bottom, and I struggled to hold my fishing rod up out of the water. I was completely helpless, while we knew that a hungry shark was swimming somewhere in the area. It felt like a scene out of a nightmare, trying to run from an invisible monster, but my feet could barely touch the ground, and I was hardly moving. I know and even knew in that moment that I had little chance of being eaten by a shark, especially one who is focused on fish. Still, if I ever were to be attacked, that was the moment, and I was utterly defenseless. A few years later, a man was killed just a few miles away when he jumped off his dock and into the path of a large bull shark that was chasing mullet. A pack of swans was hunting poor little me when I was 9 years old. I was very drunk at a wedding on a large property in rural NSW. I like to wander and explore when I drink. I was alone and suddenly confronted with a wombat. Wombats are massive balls of muscle. Being the drunk idiot I was all like, "Oh hello me wombat," and began to approach it. The wombat did not like this. It charged me. It was so fast. My heart stopped, and I turned and ran as fast as I could. The little bugger nearly caught me. I sprinted back to the wedding in fear for my life. I was riding my bike around once when I see this big ass pitbull running straight at me. Luckily for me, I was turning to go downhill and already in highest gear, but holy shit, that pitbull could run. I must have been pulling 35 miles per hour on the bottom of that hill, and that fucker was still right alongside me trying to bite my leg. Finally it gave up I guess, and I didn't stop pedaling top speed until I was half a mile away. I did field work back and forth between the US/UK and East and Southern Africa for 10 years, and in that time period, spent a good chunk of my life living at remote base camps, so I have a few crap yourself moments that I can list off the top of my head. I was chased by an elephant. It was worse as she had a calf. I know for a fact that I was stalked by at least 2 big cats twice, one being a leopard as it was the only large species around at the field site, and the other was most likely a rogue male lion given that one was seen close by earlier and was known to hang out in the area. This one occurred in Alaska. It was my day off, and I was reading in the main tent as everyone went into town, and I turned around, only to find a moose cow and calf about 5 meters away from me. This is the most recent event. We were having a party one night and I guess someone forgot to shut the kitchen door. I woke up in the morning hungover and decided to make coffee. The rubbish bag was underneath the sink, and I heard something in it. I was directly over it, and I saw coils within striking distance from a Mozambique spitting cobra. That was only a crap yourself moment. 2 spotted hyenas broke into our camp, killed a few dogs, and then went over to a few tents, including mine, and pushed their muzzle through. The most surreal thing about that was, if you know anything about spotted hyenas, they actually make a noise every now and then, or every freaking night, called a whoop. It's insanely loud. One of them actually made that noise. It hurt my ears, but interestingly enough, it turns out that there is actually a growl that is always made directly after the whoop. So, really close up it sounds like whoop, grrrr and so on. I have a few other stories, but none of them were as terrifying as those, or made me feel that my life was directly threatened. Growing up, my grandma babysat me. She lived with my uncle. He had a Rottweiler, who was very friendly. One day, when I was 9 to 10, I decided I wanted to pretend to be a wrestler. I did this by putting white masking tape on my hands and arms. I ended up fighting stuffed animals and all that. When I got tired, I just grabbed some action figures and went to the carport, which had deer stands. This was where the Rottweiler also slept. So the dog was asleep when I got there. I started playing with the toys. A few minutes later I heard the dog stirring. I pay no mind to it. I then hear growling. I turn around, and the dog is growling at me. I try to let her know it is me, but she is still growling. I then slowly back away, and she lunges at me. Being the somewhat smart kid I was, I noticed immediately she was going for my arms. I rip off the masking tape, throw it at the dog, and run back into the house. Avoided that dog for days, until I was asked to feed her. She was friendly again. When I was 12, a young stallion decided he wanted to play with me and almost killed me. He kicked and bit me and tried to trample me. He was my pet and was only treating me the way he'd treat a peer. I even knew that while it was happening. I made a huge mistake by turning my back on him while he was playful. He bit me and pulled me down. Knocked me down a couple of more times with a forefoot when I tried to get up. Reared up over me to stamp me a couple of times too. Still have the scar on my leg, and that was a long time ago. Literally pissed myself during. My dad basically saved my life by chasing him off. His response was, "That was close. What did you learn?" I was solo hiking in the Porcupine Mountains in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last autumn. Although I was by myself, there were plenty of other backpackers up there those couple of days. I ran across a bear print in the trail one morning. A few hours later I rounded a corner of the trail, and about 70 feet up ahead, I saw the hindquarters of an animal with dark brown fur about 2 feet high. I got a surge of adrenaline and everything started going in slow motion. I started to panic, and just as the poop was about to leave my butt, the animal lifted its head, and it ended up being a black Labrador retriever. Right as I catch my breath, the dog's owner came rounding the corner from the opposite direction, and sees me clutching my chest. Driving down the highway, and a spider drops out from the visor and hangs in midair in front of me, then just vanishes in my lap. I blacked out, but the passengers in my Uber said I was screaming, "We are all gonna die," over and over. The only natural physiological response. Getting charged by a black bear. I was hunting elk and walking on an old 90-year-old railroad grade in some dense forest, and I see some movement in a tree. I get to looking, and it is 2 bear cubs. Oh shit. I look around, and though a somewhat clear spot for the trees, I see Mom, and she is headed right for me at this point. I was hunting with a fairly large rifle, a .375 H&H Magnum, so I decided to give her one warning shot, and if I had to shoot a second time it would be in self-defense. I put one round into the dirt in front of her, and thankfully she decided that the cannon that just fired at her was something she didn't want any part of, and she scrambled back and took off into the brush. I also noped the frick out of there and didn't go that way the rest of the season. She can have that spot. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and like for more future content.